The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. Explosions echoed across the desolate battlefield, illuminating the ruins of what had once been a thriving colony. The twin moons of Nizar 7 cast a pale light over the destruction, revealing the silhouettes of fallen soldiers, both human and alien, strewn across the war-torn landscape. Orin tightened his grip on his pulse rifle as he crouched behind a broken wall. His breathing was heavy, each inhale bringing the taste of ash and blood. His squad was gone, wiped out in a surprise ambush by the Valen forces. Now, he was alone, trapped in enemy territory with no way out. The extraction team had already left, assuming him dead. He was expendable. The thought stung, but it wasn't surprising. He had always known that mercenaries like him were disposable assets in this endless war. A flicker of movement in the distance made him freeze. He raised his rifle, finger hovering over the trigger. Through the smoke, a lone figure emerged, moving with the lethal grace of a predator. The figure was clad in a distinctive black armor of the Valen elite warriors. Orin's jaw clenched. If the rumors were true, the Valen commander leading this assault was not just any soldier. She was a legend among her people, a ghost on the battlefield who never left survivors. Commander Selya. She was getting closer, her steps silent despite the debris beneath her boots. Orin steadied his aim. He had fought Valens before, but something about her was different. She carried herself with an air of ruthless efficiency, yet there was no sadistic pleasure in her actions. Unlike other Valen warriors who relished in the slaughter, she moved with purpose, as if following a duty she did not entirely believe in. Orin's heart pounded. He had one shot, one chance to take her down before she saw him. He exhaled slowly, lining up his sights on her exposed neck just above her armor. Then, she turned her head, her piercing silver eyes locking onto his through the smoke. In that moment, time seemed to slow. He saw something in her expression that made him hesitate. Not hatred. Not bloodlust. Doubt. And the doubt saved his life. Before he could fire, an unearthly shriek split the air. The ground trembled as monstrous figures burst from the shadows. Shadow stalkers. Their elongated, skeletal bodies twisted unnaturally as they lunged toward the two warriors. Their glowing red eyes burned with hunger. Orin barely had time to react before one of the creatures slammed into him, knocking his rifle from his hands. He rolled onto his back, drawing his combat knife as the beast loomed over him, jaws snapping. He slashed blindly, his blade cutting through the creature's thick hide. It screeched in rage but didn't fall. A plasma bolt seared through the air, hitting the creature square in the chest. It shrieked and collapsed in a smoking heap. Orin turned his head and saw Selya standing a few feet away, her pulse pistol still aimed at the beast's corpse. She had saved him. But why? They were enemies. She should have let the shadow stalkers tear him apart. Instead, she had made a choice. And now, their fates were intertwined. More creatures howled in the distance, drawn by the sound of the fight. Orin and Selya exchanged a look, one filled with reluctant understanding. For now, they would have to work together. Survival demanded it. The night stretched endlessly over the ruined battlefield, the twin moons of Nizar 7 casting eerie shadows across the wreckage. The distant howls of the shadow stalkers echoed through the desolation, growing louder with each passing moment. Orin and Commander Selya stood amidst the wreckage, their weapons drawn, their bodies tense. They were enemies, yet for now, their survival depended on a fragile, unspoken truce. Orin was the first to break the silence. "You could have let that thing kill me. Why didn't you?" Selya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the area, her silver eyes calculating. "Because right now, we have a bigger threat than each other." If you want to live through this night, you'll follow me. Orin exhaled sharply, glancing at the bodies of fallen soldiers and creatures alike. He had spent years on battlefields, but tonight felt different, like a shift in the tide of war. With a grunt, he reloaded his rifle. Lead the way, then. But don't expect me to trust you. Selya gave a small, humorless smirk. Trust is irrelevant. Survival is what matters. They moved swiftly through the ruins, avoiding the open areas where the shadow stalkers hunted. The creatures were relentless, their hunger insatiable. Orin had only encountered them in stories, legends of monstrous beings that feasted on the wounded and dying, leaving only husks behind. Tonight, those legends had become reality. As they navigated the wreckage, Orin observed Selya. She moved with precision, her every step calculated. She was unlike the bloodthirsty Valen warriors he had fought before. There was no cruelty in her actions, only efficiency. And yet, something about her unsettled him, like she carried a secret far heavier than the war itself. They reached the remnants of an old outpost, half buried under rubble. Selya motioned for him to stay low as she scouted ahead. Orin followed, gripping his rifle tightly. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant growl. Inside the outpost, they found scattered supplies enough to last a few hours at best. Orin rummaged through the wreckage, pulling out a medkit and a small rations pack. He tossed one to Selya, who caught it without a word. They sat opposite each other, the flickering remains of a broken hollow lamp casting dim light between them. Orin leaned back against the cold metal wall. So, what's your plan? Selya took a measured breath. We wait for the patrols to pass. Then we move toward the eastern ridge. There's a communications array there. If it's still operational, I can send a distress signal. Orin frowned. You think your people will come for you? For the first time, Selya hesitated. Not my people. Someone else. Orin narrowed his eyes. Who are you really fighting for, Kor? Because from where I'm standing, you don't seem too loyal to your side. Selya met his gaze, her silver eyes unreadable. And you? Your people left you behind. Why are you still fighting? Orin clenched his jaw. He had no answer to that. Maybe he was just too stubborn to die. Before he could respond, a sound outside made them both go rigid. The low, guttural growl of a shadow stalker. They weren't alone. Selya moved first, her pistol drawn. Orin followed, his rifle at the ready. Through a crack in the rubble, they saw the creature slinking through the ruins, its elongated limbs moving unnaturally as it sniffed the air. Orin's grip tightened. We take it down fast and quiet. Selya nodded. Follow my lead. In that moment, the lines between enemy and ally blurred. They were no longer soldiers of opposing sides. They were just survivors, bound by necessity. And the night was far from over. The silence stretched between them as the shadow stalker prowled just outside their makeshift shelter. Orin could feel his heartbeat hammering against his ribs, each second dragging by like an eternity. Selya signaled for him to stay low as she raised her weapon, her silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. The creature moved closer, sniffing the air, its elongated limbs shifting unnaturally. Orin had fought against monstrous beings before, but the shadow stalkers were something else entirely, predators that thrived in the dark, seemingly invincible. He knew they had only seconds before it sensed them. Selya moved first. With precise, controlled speed, she fired a single energy bolt, striking the beast between its eyes. The creature let out a shriek, its body convulsing as it stumbled back. Orin lunged forward, driving his knife into its throat before it could recover. The beast gurgled, then collapsed into a heap, motionless. They both exhaled sharply. Orin wiped his blade on his sleeve and looked at Selya. "You've got good reflexes." She didn't respond immediately, only reloading her weapon with smooth efficiency. "We need to move before more show up." Orin nodded. The outpost was compromised, and staying put was no longer an option. Together, they gathered what little supplies they could carry and slipped into the darkness, keeping low and moving fast. The ruined battlefield stretched before them, twisted metal and broken structures creating a labyrinth of shadows. As they moved, Orin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He had spent years on battlefields, and that instinct had saved his life more times than he could count. He glanced at Selya, who seemed just as tense. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Selya halted, scanning their surroundings. The wind carried an eerie stillness, the kind that set his nerves on edge. Then, he saw a flicker of movement in the distance. Not a shadow stalker. Something else. Selya noticed it too. "We're not alone." Orin gripped his rifle. "Friend or foe? We'll find out soon enough." They pressed on, weaving through the ruins. The communications array was still their best chance of escaping this place, but getting there wouldn't be easy. The deeper they went, the more remnants of battle they encountered: fallen soldiers, destroyed weapons, shattered insignias of both warring factions. This planet had become a graveyard. As they reached a narrow pass between two collapsed buildings, a sudden voice echoed through the ruins. "Drop your weapons. Now." Orin and Selya spun around to find themselves surrounded. A small group of survivors, battle-worn and weary, emerged from the shadows, weapons trained on them. Their leader, a rugged man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "You're not Valen," he said, eyes narrowing at Orin. Then, his gaze shifted to Selya. "But you are. So why the hell are you with him?" Selya remained expressionless. "Because I want to live. Just like you." The man considered her words before lowering his weapon slightly. "Name's Rask. We were left behind when our units pulled out. Thought we were the only ones left." Orin studied them. They looked like a mix of both factions' former enemies forced together by circumstance. Just like him and Selya. "We're heading for the eastern ridge," Orin said. "There's a comms array there. If we can get a signal out." Rask laughed bitterly. "That array's fried. We checked it days ago. No one's coming." Orin clenched his jaw. "Then we find another way." Selya crossed her arms. "You can either help us or stay here and wait for the shadow stalkers to finish you off." Rask hesitated, then exchanged glances with his group. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. But if either of you tries anything, you won't live to regret it." With that uneasy alliance, they pressed on into the ruins. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were running out of time. The alliance between Orin, Selya, and Rask's group was tenuous at best. None of them truly trusted each other, but trust was a luxury none could afford in a place like this. The ruins of the battlefield stretched out before them, a maze of crumbling structures and smoldering wreckage. The sky above was darkened by the remnants of the conflict that had nearly destroyed this planet, and the air was thick with the scent of burned metal and death. Orin walked slightly ahead, his senses on high alert. He had fought alongside men like Rask before, survivors hardened by war, willing to do whatever it took to stay alive. He also knew that desperate men were dangerous, and right now, every single person in their group was desperate. Selya remained close but silent. She had barely spoken since their encounter with Resk's group, her expression unreadable. Orin had no doubt she was calculating their odds of survival and deciding how much she should invest in this fragile alliance. He wished he could say he wasn't doing the same. Rask motioned for the group to stop as they reached the remnants of what had once been a supply depot. "We scouted this place 2 days ago," he said in a low voice. "There might still be rations and medical supplies inside, but it's risky." "Define risky," Orin muttered, scanning the ruins for movement. Rask exhaled sharply. "Shadow stalkers hit this place hard. Some of my men never made it out. If they are still inside, they are either dead or worse." Orin exchanged a glance with Selya. They didn't have many options. "We need those supplies," she said simply. Rask nodded. "Then we go in fast. Take only what we need. No heroics." They moved cautiously into the depot, weapons at the ready. The air inside was stale, thick with a metallic scent of blood. The walls were scorched, signs of past battles etched into every surface. The flickering remnants of emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the wreckage. Orin stepped over a fallen beam and spotted a storage locker against the far wall. He gestured to Selya, and together, they pried it open. Inside, they found a small stash of rations, a half-empty medkit, and a single, barely functioning energy cell. "Better than nothing," Selya murmured, shoving the supplies into her pack. Rask and his men were searching the other side of the room when a sudden, guttural sound froze them all in place. Orin felt his blood run cold. He had heard that sound before. Shadow stalkers. A moment later, the silence shattered as the creatures lunged from the darkness. They moved with terrifying speed, their elongated limbs twisting unnaturally as they closed the distance. Rask's men opened fire, but the beasts barely flinched. Orin grabbed Selya's arm. "Move." They ducked behind a collapsed section of the wall as chaos erupted. Rask shouted orders, his men firing in all directions. One of them screamed as a shadow stalker tore him apart, his weapon clattering to the ground. Orin fired his rifle, hitting one of the creatures square in the chest. It recoiled but didn't fall. Selya aimed for the head, her shot blasting through the beast's skull. It collapsed in a heap, but more were coming. "We can't fight them all," Rask shouted. "We need to get out of here." Orin scanned the room, spotting a collapsed doorway leading to an open corridor. There. They made a break for it, weaving through the wreckage as the shadow stalkers pursued them. One of Rask's men tripped, and before Orin could react, the creatures were on him. His screams were cut short, replaced by the sickening sound of tearing flesh. Orin didn't look back. He focused on the exit, on survival. They burst into the corridor, barely managing to slam the heavy door shut behind them. The creatures shrieked and pounded against the metal, but it held for now. Panting, Orin turned to Rask. Only 3 of his men had made it out. Rask's face was grim, but he didn't waste time mourning. "We need to keep moving." Selya leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "That was too close." Orin nodded, his mind already racing. They had the supplies, but they had also lost valuable time and people. The shadow stalkers weren't going to stop hunting them. And now, they were running out of places to run. As the pounding on the door grew louder, Orin realized one thing: their fragile alliance wouldn't last forever. And if they wanted to survive, they would have to make some hard choices sooner rather than later. The pounding on the metal door had finally stopped, but Orin knew better than to believe they were safe. Shadow stalkers were relentless hunters, patient enough to wait for their prey to make a mistake. Their silence was not a sign of retreat, it was a calculated pause, a cruel reminder that the beasts were in control. Selya stood beside him, her silver eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor ahead. Rask and his remaining men were breathing heavily, shaken but composed. The cost of the recent encounter weighed heavily on them all. They had survived, but barely. "We can't stay here," Rask muttered, rubbing his temples. "They'll find another way in." Orin agreed. The depot had been a disaster, a desperate gamble for supplies that had cost them more than it had gained. They needed a new plan. Selya was the first to move. "We go underground," she said. "The ruins have old maintenance tunnels. If we can reach them, we might be able to bypass the worst of the danger." Rask scowled. "And if those tunnels are crawling with something worse?" "They are our best chance," Orin said firmly. "Or would you rather wait here and let the stalkers pick us off one by one?" Rask hesitated before grunting in reluctant agreement. His men exchanged uneasy glances but followed as Selya led the way deeper into the ruins. The entrance to the tunnels was buried beneath debris, a jagged hole in the earth that descended into complete darkness. The air was damp and stale, carrying the scent of decay. Selya activated a small wrist light, casting eerie shadows along the stone walls. "We stay quiet," she whispered. "No unnecessary noise." Orin went first, his rifle held at the ready. The others followed in a tense silence, their footsteps barely audible against the damp ground. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, twisting and narrowing in some places. At one point, they passed an old service chamber, its walls covered in strange, claw-like markings. Orin halted. "Something's been down here?" Rask tensed. "Tell me it's not those things again." Selya studied the markings closely. "No. This is different." Orin exchanged a look with her. Different wasn't necessarily better. As they continued, the tunnel widened into an open chamber, remnants of old technology scattered across the floor. A console flickered weakly in the corner, its screen covered in dust. Selya hurried to it, wiping away the grime. "This might still work," she murmured, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "I can access the city's old schematics, find a way out." Rask's men kept watch, their weapons drawn. Every sound, every shift in the darkness, put them on edge. Orin turned to Selya. "How long?" She exhaled sharply. "Minutes. Maybe less." They didn't have minutes. A low growl echoed from the tunnel behind them. Not the piercing shrieks of the shadow stalkers, but something deeper, heavier. Orin's grip tightened on his weapon. "We're not alone." Rask spun toward the sound. "Damn it, what now?" The first movement was subtle, a flicker of motion in the shadows. Then, without warning, something lunged from the darkness. It was massive, its body armored with thick plates, its eyes burning like embers. It was a predator unlike anything they had encountered before. Orin fired first, his shot striking the creature's hide but barely slowing it down. The beast roared and charged, knocking one of Rask's men off his feet. Claws tore into flesh, and the soldier's screams were cut short. "Move!" Orin shouted. Selya grabbed a pulse grenade from her belt, activating it and hurling it toward the beast. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending debris flying. Smoke filled the air, obscuring their view. Orin pulled Selya back as the dust settled. The creature lay still, its massive form partially buried under fallen rubble. But there was no time to celebrate. "Did you get the route?" Orin asked urgently. Selya held up a small data module. "Got it. Let's go." They didn't need to be told twice. They ran, navigating the tunnels with renewed urgency, following Selya's map toward the surface. The dangers they had left behind were nothing compared to what awaited them ahead. But one thing was clear: if they wanted to survive, they would have to be willing to pay the cost. And some of them might not make it out alive. The oppressive weight of the underground tunnels pressed in on Orin's mind as the group moved forward. Every step felt like a gamble, each shadow a potential threat. The flickering wrist light from Selya's arm cast long, eerie shapes on the damp stone walls, their movements exaggerated like ghostly figures stalking them from the darkness. Rask was silent, his jaw set tight as he led the way, his remaining men flanking him. They had lost too many already, and Orin knew the losses weighed on him perhaps even more than the looming threats ahead. Selya's breathing was steady but controlled, her focus locked onto the data module in her hand. She had mapped out the safest route to the surface, but safe was a relative term in a place like this. "We should be close," she whispered, adjusting the small screen's resolution. "There's a vertical access shaft up ahead. If it's intact, we can reach the upper ruins." "Big if," Orin muttered, glancing at the corroded infrastructure around them. He didn't trust these tunnels, nor did he trust whatever else might be lurking beneath the surface. The air suddenly grew colder, and an unnatural silence settled over them. Orin stopped abruptly. "Something's wrong." Rask's men instinctively raised their weapons, eyes darting around the dim passage. Then came the whispery voice, hollow and distant, but unmistakably real. "You should not have come here." The group spun, weapons aimed at the darkness behind them. Out of the gloom, a figure emerged. Cloaked in remnants of old war gear, its face obscured by a tattered hood, the stranger moved with a slow, deliberate grace. His voice was low, almost amused. "You tread on forbidden ground." Orin stepped forward, rifle steady. "Who are you?" The stranger tilted his head, as if considering the question. "A guardian, a remnant of the past. And you are trespassers." Selya narrowed her eyes. "We're trying to get out of here. We don't want trouble." A dry chuckle. "You bring trouble with you?" He gestured to the tunnel behind them. "The ones who hunt you will not stop. But I can offer you an alternative." Rask scoffed. "And what's the price?" The stranger lifted a gloved hand, revealing a small metallic key. "This unlocks a different way out, a hidden route, beyond the reach of the creatures that chase you. But everything has a cost." Orin clenched his jaw. "What do you want?" The stranger stepped closer, his unseen gaze resting on Selya. "Her." Silence. The word hung in the air like a blade poised to drop. Orin's grip on his weapon tightened. "That's not happening." Rask looked between them, a calculating expression crossing his face. "What do you need her for?" "She holds knowledge. Secrets valuable beyond your understanding." The stranger's tone remained calm, as if discussing a simple trade. Selya's expression didn't waver. "I'm not going anywhere with you." A low chuckle. "Then you will all die in these tunnels." Orin's heart pounded. He didn't trust this man, but the alternative, stumbling blindly into the ruins, with shadow stalkers and who knew what else on their heels, was just as deadly. Rask exhaled sharply. "We take the key. We get out of here." Orin shot him a sharp look. "Not at that price." Rask's gaze was unreadable. He looked at Selya, then back to the stranger. And then, without hesitation, he moved. A gunshot echoed in the tunnel. The stranger staggered back, a bloom of crimson spreading across his cloak. Orin spun in time to see Rask lowering his weapon, face impassive. "No deals," Rask said simply. For a long moment, the stranger didn't react. Then, slowly, he smiled. So be it. The ground trembled beneath them. From the darkness, the tunnels came alive not with shadow stalkers, but with something far worse. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the stone walls, and a dozen glowing eyes appeared in the distance, watching, waiting. Selya cursed. You shouldn't have done that. Rask's men tensed, their weapons shifting toward the emerging threat. The stranger staggered but didn't fall. You have sealed your fate. Orin didn't wait for more words. Run. The group turned, sprinting toward the access shaft as the tunnel behind them erupted into chaos. The creatures came, swift and merciless, their movements too fast for the eye to follow. Gunfire rang out, but it only slowed them. Rask's men were the first to fall. Orin pulled Selya forward as she fired over her shoulder. The shaft loomed ahead, a towering structure of rusted metal and broken ladders. Their only chance. Climb. Orin shouted. Selya grabbed onto the nearest ladder rung, hauling herself up. Orin followed, his fingers barely gripping the rusted metal as something massive crashed below them. Rask was still on the ground, covering their escape with rapid fire. His men were gone. The creatures advanced, their snarls deafening. Rask, move. Orin called down. But Rask stood firm. He knew he wasn't making it out. Go, he barked, his eyes locking onto Orin's. I'll buy you time. There was no argument to be made. Orin clenched his jaw and climbed faster. Below, Rask emptied his last clip into the advancing creatures. The last thing Orin saw before reaching the top was Rask, standing his ground, and then darkness. A metallic hatch loomed ahead, their exit. Orin and Selya pushed through, collapsing onto solid ground as the tunnel below was swallowed by chaos. They had escaped. But not without cost. Orin gasped for breath as he and Selya collapsed onto the cold, metallic floor of the ruins above. The sounds of the tunnel collapsing beneath them sent tremors through their bones, but they had made it. Selya groaned, rolling onto her side. Rask, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Orin clenched his jaw. Rask had made his choice. A warrior's end. There was no time to mourn. They needed to keep moving. The ruins stretched before them, a maze of jagged metal structures and broken pathways. The sky above was no longer obscured by the oppressive weight of the tunnels, but freedom felt like an illusion. The city above was just as hostile, and the sounds of pursuit still echoed behind them. We can't stop here, Orin said, helping Selya to her feet. They'll be coming. Selya nodded, shaking off the exhaustion. The data module she had risked so much for was still clutched in her hands. Whatever secrets it held, they were now worth Rask's sacrifice. They moved quickly, darting between collapsed structures, keeping low. The ruins were eerily silent, save for the distant howling of the wind through the crumbling skyscrapers. The air was thick with dust and decay, the remnants of a once thriving world long abandoned. Orin led the way, rifle in hand, scanning every shadow. He knew better than to assume they were safe. The shadow stalkers weren't the only threats lurking here. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Down, he hissed, grabbing Selya and pulling her behind a rusted beam. They crouched low as a patrol of Syndicate enforcers passed nearby. Their armor gleamed under the pale light, and their weapons were high-grade too advanced for mere scavengers. Orin's heart pounded. The Syndicate had arrived. Selya met his gaze, her eyes filled with a silent question. Do we run or fight? Before Orin could answer, the decision was made for them. One of the enforcers paused, scanning the area. A red visor flared to life, detecting residual heat signatures. Orin swore under his breath. "They know we're here?" Without hesitation, they bolted. Shouts erupted behind them as the enforcers took pursuit. Gunfire cracked through the air, sending sparks flying as bullets ricocheted off metal debris. Orin and Selya weaved through the ruins, vaulting over broken walls, ducking through collapsed hallways. The city was a graveyard of war, but it provided cover if only for a moment. There. Selya pointed ahead to an old transit station, its entrance barely intact. They sprinted inside, slamming the rusted door shut behind them. The sound of heavy boots pounded outside, but for now, they had a barrier. Orin exhaled sharply, checking his weapon. "We need a plan." Selya studied the data module. "There's a safe house nearby. If we can reach it, we can regroup, get supplies." Orin nodded. "Then we move. Now." The hunt wasn't over. The surface wasn't salvation. It was just another battlefield. And they had only begun to fight. The wind howled through the ruined city, carrying with it the distant echoes of their pursuers. Orin's breath came in sharp bursts as he and Selya pushed forward, weaving through the wreckage of a world long forgotten. The safe house Selya spoke of was their only hope, but every instinct in Orin's body screamed that safety was a fleeting illusion. Selya clutched the data module to her chest, her grip tight as if letting go would erase everything they had fought for. The module held the key to Syndicate's dark secrets, secrets they would kill to keep buried. Orin scanned the crumbling structures ahead. "How much farther?" "Not far," Selya panted. "It's an old resistance bunker, hidden beneath the collapsed transit hub. If it's still intact, we might have a chance." Orin wasn't convinced. "And if it's compromised?" She didn't answer. They both knew the risks. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Their pursuers weren't far behind. They pressed on, dodging between twisted steel beams and shattered concrete. The ruins provided cover, but the Syndicate enforcers had the advantage, drones scanning overhead, tracking their every movement. As they neared the transit hub, the ground beneath them trembled. Orin threw out an arm, halting Selya in her tracks. The tremor wasn't natural. It was the heavy footsteps of something massive. A low, mechanical growl rumbled through the air. From the shadows emerged a Syndicate war mech, its red eyes glowing like dying embers. The metal beast was built for destruction, its armor nearly impervious to conventional weapons. Selya cursed under her breath. "They are not playing around." "We need to move," Orin said, gripping his rifle tighter. Diving into the wreckage, they sprinted for the entrance to the bunker. The mech's targeting systems locked onto them, and within seconds, a blast of plasma scorched the air where they had stood just moments ago. Orin felt the heat singe the back of his neck as they dove into the opening of the collapsed station. Inside, darkness swallowed them. Orin pulled Selya to her feet, scanning their surroundings. The bunker entrance was just ahead, a reinforced hatch partially buried under debris. With a grunt, Orin shoved aside the rubble, revealing the keypad. Selya's fingers danced across the controls. "Come on, come on." A beep. Then another. The hatch groaned before slowly sliding open. "Go." Orin shoved her inside before diving in himself. The door slammed shut behind them, and a moment later, an explosion shook the bunker. Dust rained from the ceiling, but the thick walls held. For the first time in hours, silence. Selya collapsed against the nearest wall, breathing heavily. "We made it." Orin wasn't so sure. He flicked on his wrist light, illuminating the space. The bunker was larger than he expected, metal walls lined with old computer terminals, supply crates stacked in the corners. But something felt wrong. A cold chill crept up his spine. The air was too still. No signs of recent habitation, yet the place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. Then, the lights flickered on. A mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Unauthorized access detected. Selya's eyes widened. It's a trap. Before Orin could react, the walls shifted. Hidden panels slid open, revealing automated turrets locking onto them. Heavy doors slammed shut, sealing every exit. And then, from the shadows, a familiar voice. You should have run farther, Orin. Syndicate Commander Devouring stepped into the light, a satisfied smirk on his scarred face. His soldiers surrounded him, weapons raised. Orin's grip on his rifle tightened, but he knew the truth: there was no fighting their way out of this one. They had walked straight into Syndicate's hands. The heavy silence in the dimly lit chamber felt suffocating. Orin's muscles were coiled with tension as he stood, bound by energy restraints, his wrists aching from the tight shackles. Across from him, Selya was similarly restrained, her face a mask of defiance despite the bruises blooming along her jawline. You walked right into our hands, fugitives. The voice belonged to Commander Caller, a high-ranking officer of the Syndicate, his gleaming black armor reflecting the cold artificial light above. He paced slowly in front of them, savoring his victory. Did you really think you could outrun us? That you could hide? Orin remained silent, his sharp eyes scanning the room for any means of escape. There had to be a way out. He refused to believe that everything had led to this a dead end. Selya, however, wasn't one to hold her tongue. You're making a mistake, Caller, she spat. You don't understand what you're dealing with. That data module doesn't just expose the Syndicate's crimes, it reveals what's coming. Caller's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Interest? He stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back. Oh, I understand plenty, he said smoothly. I understand that you're both traitors. And I understand that soon, neither of you will be alive to tell your story. He turned to the side and gave a sharp nod. The doors behind him slid open with a mechanical hiss, and a figure stepped inside. Orin's breath caught in his throat. Rask. Alive. But the relief was short-lived. Rask wasn't here as an ally. He stood beside Caller, his stance rigid, his expression carefully neutral. A traitor. Selya inhaled sharply, her fists clenching. You, she whispered. You were with him all along. Rask's gaze flickered with something guilt. Regret? But his voice was firm. It was the only way. Orin's blood boiled. The only way, he growled. You sold us out. You sold out everything we fought for. Caller chuckled. Your friend here was quite reasonable. He saw that resistance is futile. That aligning with power is the only logical choice. Rask finally met Orin's eyes. You don't understand. The Syndicate isn't the biggest threat anymore. There are worse things coming. The night air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. Orin and Selya sprinted through the ruined corridors of the Syndicate facility, their breaths ragged but their focus unshaken. Behind them, alarms blared, red lights flashing wildly as explosions rocked the compound. The resistance forces had arrived, and the battle was unfolding in full force. Orin gripped his stolen weapon tightly, his muscles screaming from exhaustion. He glanced at Selya, who was clutching the data module to her chest. They had risked everything for that information, proof of the Syndicate's experiments, their atrocities, and most importantly, the secret of what was coming. Where's the extraction point? Orin shouted over the noise, dodging a piece of falling debris. Selya's eyes darted across the battlefield as she checked her wrist console. North Sector. We have to get past the security perimeter. Easier said than done. Syndicate enforcers swarmed the area, engaging in a brutal firefight with resistance soldiers. Energy blasts illuminated the dark ruins like bursts of lightning, and the screams of the wounded echoed across the battlefield. Orin raised his rifle, taking down an advancing enforcer with a well-placed shot. He and Selya moved with precision, weaving between cover, using the wreckage to their advantage. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "You won't escape." Commander Collar emerged from the smoke, his black armor gleaming under the emergency lights. He held a high-powered blaster, aimed directly at them. His face was a mask of fury and determination. Orin barely had time to react before Collar fired. He pushed Selya aside, the energy blast narrowly missing them both. Orin rolled to cover and returned fire, but Collar was fast, dodging with inhuman reflexes. It was clear this was the final confrontation. "You think you can bring us down?" Collar taunted. "The Syndicate is eternal. You're nothing but insects in a storm." Selya, still clutching the module, activated her wrist console. "Orin, stall him. I'm uploading the data to the resistance network." Orin gritted his teeth. "On it." Collar lunged forward, engaging Orin in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Their weapons were knocked aside as they exchanged blows, fists meeting armor with sickening force. Orin dodged a deadly strike, countering with a sharp knee to Collar's ribs, but the commander barely flinched. "You're strong," Collar growled, grabbing Orin by the throat. "But you're not strong enough." Orin gasped as he was lifted off the ground, Collar's grip tightening like a vice. Black spots danced in his vision, his strength waning. Then, a sharp crack filled the air. Selya had struck Collar from behind with a metal pipe, staggering him. Orin seized the opening, wrenching free and delivering a brutal punch to Collar's temple. The commander stumbled, his balance failing. "No. I can't." Orin didn't let him finish. With one final, forceful kick, he sent Collar tumbling over the edge of the platform, disappearing into the fire below. Silence. Then a distant explosion consumed the depths of the Syndicate base. Orin staggered back, breathing hard. Selya caught his arm, steadying him. "The upload, it's done," she whispered. They had won. Resistance ships roared overhead, breaking through the Syndicate's final defenses. The tides had turned. The people of the galaxy would know the truth. As they climbed aboard an extraction ship, Orin looked back one last time. The Syndicate had fallen. But the war for freedom was just beginning. Selya squeezed his hand. "We fight for a better future?" Orin nodded. "And we're just getting started." The ship took off into the stars, leaving the burning past behind. Selya scoffed. "That doesn't justify betraying us." Collar sighed. "Enough of this sentimental drivel." He motioned to the guards. "Take them to processing. The execution will be swift." As the guards approached, Orin knew this was their only chance. He had studied their captors carefully. He had memorized the layout of the chamber. He looked at Selya, and she gave a barely perceptible nod. They were ready. The moment the guards unlocked their restraints, chaos erupted. Orin lashed out, using his freed hands to grab a weapon from the nearest soldier. A swift elbow strike to the face sent another guard sprawling. Selya was just as fast. She ducked under a swinging baton, twisted, and delivered a precise kick to a guard's throat. Rask hesitated, torn between action and inaction. For a fleeting moment, Orin thought he might rejoin them. But instead, he turned away. Coward, Orin spat before lunging at the next opponent. The fight was brutal. They were outnumbered, but desperation fueled them. Orin and Selya fought with everything they had, their movements in sync as if they had trained for this moment their entire lives. Caller, clearly unimpressed, raised his firearm. Enough! A deafening explosion rocked the facility. The walls trembled. Alarms blared. The overhead lights flickered, plunging the room into bursts of shadow and flashing red. A distant roar filled the air. A ship? An attack? Selya's eyes widened. The resistance. They found us. Orin grabbed her hand. Then we're not dying here? The Syndicate's forces scrambled in confusion as another explosion ripped through the base. Smoke and fire filled the corridors. Orin and Selya seized their moment, dashing through the chaos, dodging falling debris and stray gunfire. Rask remained behind, his figure barely visible through the smoke. Orin spared him one last glance before turning away. There was no saving him now. As they neared the exit, Orin felt the cold night air rushing in. The battle wasn't over. The war wasn't won. But they had survived. And that meant they still had a chance to finish what they started.